Welcome to the Adult Chair Podcast with Michelle Chalfant, a place to delve into who we are, how we got that way, and explore what it takes to be a healthy grown-up. With an extensive toolbox and guests with varied expertise, Michelle will lead us on a journey to learn what it's like to live authentically and to love ourselves just the way we are. And now, here's Michelle.
Hello, everybody. It is Michelle Chalfant, and it is, as always, a pleasure to be here with you today in my adult chair, of course, always. Just kidding. That's not true. I try to be in my adult chair all the time, but we do have a very tricky adolescent chair. That ego, boy, I get pulled in there sometimes, which is perfectly okay. And for those of you that are new and listening to me right now and wondering, what is the adult chair? Go check it out at theadultchair.com for more information about the podcast and everything adult chair. There it is right on the website, theadultchair.com. And if you are new, welcome. We love having you. And if you are someone that might have shared the show, which I know tons of you do, I want to say a big shout out to all of you and thank all of you, every single one of you. I appreciate you always sharing the show and letting me know that. So, all right, today we're talking about boundaries. Yeah. And I know I've talked about this a few other times on other shows, but I'm realizing we as humans cannot get enough about boundaries because it's something that we have to continue to practice and learn how to do. We're just not great at it. So given the last few shows, we did toxic relationships and then self-esteem last week. This is like the perfect third show in that lineup, setting boundaries. So I will put in the show notes the other shows that I did on boundaries. I did boundaries and defenses, and then I just did boundaries versus confrontation a long time ago, one of the first shows. But I'll put that all in the show notes if you want to go back and listen to those as well. But for today, it's a fresh show on setting boundaries, how we do that, and everything you want to know about boundaries. And when boundaries backfire, what do we do? So it's all in there. But I'm just going to share with you guys. We do this work in the Adult Chair Intensive, which, by the way, is coming up October. October 24th, 25th, and 26th, which is a Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in San Antonio, Texas. We will be there doing a 3-day Adult Chair event. So if you want to learn about how, first of all, what this whole model is all about, and how you can work with your own child chair, adolescent chair, and adult chair, come join us. And you better do it quickly because I have a discount running and it expires this coming Sunday, September 15th at midnight. The $100 discount goes away. So make sure you jump on it. You can go on over to theadultchair.com/events and find out everything you're going to need to know about this intensive that we are doing in San Antonio. The other thing I want to mention is the membership. This month we're doing I Matter. It is a powerful month. And with I Matter, this month is where I changed things up a little bit in that membership and I've added to it. Now you get the podcasts, the meditations, the affirmations, journaling prompts, and now you get what I'm calling, instead of homework, I didn't like the word homework, I'm calling it self-discovery work because my job, I feel like, is to take you deeper. And I do that with this weekly self-discovery work that you get emailed to you. So lots going on in that membership. People love it. It's a true deep dive into the adult chair. And you can check that out at theadultchair.com/membership. Okay, here we go. Jumping in to boundaries, setting boundaries. First of all, why do people cringe when I suggest that they set a boundary when someone has hurt them? Think about it. If somebody hurts you or crosses a line with you, how do you react? What do you do? I have many people that say to me, oh, I'm just going to let that go. It's not really that important. And I stop them and I'll ask them, like, it's not important or I am not that important? When people say it's not important that I speak up for myself or I don't need to set a boundary, I really do hear I'm not that important. Because if I was that important, I would speak up for myself. We're not taught how to set boundaries, and that's the problem when we're children and growing up in households. Most of us aren't modeled healthy boundaries. So most of us then, as adults, how in the world are we supposed to know how to do it? So that's what we're talking about today. Because think about it like this. If a little kid on a playground calls another kid a mean name or kicks dirt in their face or whatever, spits on them, whatever kids do on playgrounds, what happens? Well, if the teacher sees, they get talked to about it. They might get a timeout. That's a boundary. So it seems like it's so much easier, when we're parents or we're older and we're disciplining these children with boundaries. And sometimes even that's tough. But when we're adults, it just feels so uncomfortable. And we see setting a boundary, or we think setting a boundary is a confrontation. That is, again, not true. I did a whole podcast on that. A boundary teaches other people how we want to be treated, period, end of story. It's no different than what we would do with that little kid on that playground. A confrontation is someone that aggressively approaches you, ready for a fight, ready for battle, with their metaphorical sword and shield up. That is not what I'm suggesting. That's an aggressive, angry boundary is a confrontation. That's not what I'm suggesting. A boundary is letting another person know what is okay with you and what is not okay with you. If you don't set a boundary, who will? It's important that we learn how to do this. So let's learn how to do it. Here we go. Of course, I love steps. So here we go with number 1. I have 4 steps here. Number 1, who are you? So in setting boundaries, it is essential to know who I am. If I don't know who I am, then how will I know when someone is offending or hurting me or making me feel bad or crossing the line? So I find that people will often, again, let things go, brush things off, which I'm all about that. I love that song, Let It Go, the Frozen song, because that helps us to stay in the moment. But not boundaries. Like if someone truly hurts us, or crosses that line, it's important to speak up and not let that go, okay? Some things we let go, but when someone is truly violating us, and that sounds very aggressive, which of course, aggressive violations need serious boundaries, but there are times when it's not this aggressive violation, we just need to speak up. And that feels so scary. It feels scary, I find, when we don't know who we are. So I suggest having fun with this activity of self-discovery. Make a list, journal about who you are. Make it fun, make it simple. It does not have to be complicated. You know me, you guys. I am about simple psychology. I am all about grounded spirituality. I like things very, very simple. I am not someone that wants to complicate anything. And I realize this whole adult chair model, that's what I'm all about. Simple. We need to simplify it. Nothing needs to be too complicated. So how do we know who we are? Start small. Make a list. Draw this out. Whatever feels right for you. I'm a woman. I'm a man. I'm 40 years old. I love pasta. I am funny. I'm an artist. I'm kind. I am generous. Make a list of who you are. I realize we lose ourselves sometimes. We forget who we are. Even these small little things make up who we are. Just makes up who we are. So write it down, draw it. I don't care. Just get a sense of who you are. If you don't know who you are, what in the world are you defending and setting a boundary against? So we've got to know who we are on the inside, right? I'm a good mom. I work with people sometimes that feel very empty on the inside. We've got to get a sense of who we are. Okay. And some people will say things to me like, well, I'm a codependent, or I'm depressed. I am anxious. I have an abusive partner. Wonderful. Write it down. Don't make those things bigger than anything else. It just makes up part of who we are. Great. Write them all down. There's no meaning around this. Just make a list of who you are. And this is who you are today. Remember, we're changing every day, but today, this is who you are. And then once you get a sense of who you are, you actually feel who this person is as a whole. If somebody says, well, I'm depressed. Okay, write it down. But what else? Well, I'm just depressed. And if I say, can you feel that? They go, I feel very heavy. But if you write down, I'm someone that experiences depression, but I also am a mom of 3 kids, and I love going to the Olive Garden, and I play tennis once a week. And you write all of those things down. Those are all of your puzzle pieces. That's all of that makes up who you are. It takes the heaviness off of that one thing. So write it all down. Then you get a sense of how you feel about this person that you just wrote about. And then you start wondering, how valuable is this person that I'm writing about? How do you feel about this person that you wrote about? Get a sense of this person that's on the paper that represents who you are. So number 2 is, how do you feel about you? Do you like yourself? Do you love yourself? Do you value yourself? How do you feel about yourself? This is all very important, because if I don't value myself, I won't feel like it's even necessary to defend or set a boundary for myself. It's like, well, what in the world am I defending? Many people that have been in toxic relationships have lost themselves and are not sure who they are or why they would need to set a boundary. So this requires really a buildup of that self-esteem. And luckily, as you know, if you listened last week, I did a whole podcast on this. Last week, it's all about self-esteem. So if this speaks to you, listen to last week's podcast if you have not done that already. And again, last week's podcast is not just for toxic, it's just in general how we build up self-esteem. Or for toxic people, it's just about building up self-esteem. But it's really important that we know this. It's like, how do I feel about myself? How do I feel about myself? If you don't feel good about yourself, we've got to shift that. And that requires that building up of self-esteem. And again, in the membership group this month, you guys, I'm doing a whole month on just I matter. So check that out too. Find ways that you can build up your inner self. It's really important. You've got to feel valuable on the inside in order to set that external boundary. So this is the next step. Number 3 is, how does this make me feel? So if somebody says something to you, it's key that we know how it makes us feel. So if I don't feel bad about what you said to me or what you did, then I won't have that indicator light that goes off inside of me that says I need to set a boundary. So if what you're saying doesn't feel bad, I won't speak up. So we have to connect to our bodies and begin to feel our emotions. And as I'm saying this, I realize I did a whole podcast on that too, on feeling emotions, which I will also put in the show notes. So if you want to get more information on that show, just go to the show notes. But if we're not connected into our emotions and our bodies, I won't know that it's time for me to speak up for myself. What happens is if we're in, I don't mean to just go back to toxic relationships, but I'm just going to talk about this just for 1 second. If we're in a relationship that feels bad and it's toxic, we learn to numb out because we don't know any other ways or another way. So what we want to do is start really getting into the body, getting into our emotions, and starting to feel like, oh, this feels bad. We don't even know, we need to know which emotion it is, but we need to know, does this feel good or bad? That's it. It's that simple. If it feels bad, we want to explore that. So it might require some journaling or sitting with yourself, just even thinking about it. Going for a walk and thinking about what that person said to you and that it didn't feel good. Maybe go talk to somebody about it. A friend, a family member, coach, therapist, it doesn't matter to me, but just start noticing like, I think I do need, maybe I should speak up for myself. I don't know how. Was that appropriate what that person said to me? Start asking some internal questions and even asking people around you if that, what so-and-so said, if it was okay, because it's starting to feel bad inside. Our emotions help us to push forward and speak up for ourselves, but we won't know that we need to do that if we're not in touch with our emotions and our body. So if your partner speaks unkindly to you and does not apologize and you feel bad, it's time for a boundary. If your boss embarrasses you in a meeting and is disrespectful, it's time for a boundary. If your mother's coming over unannounced and disrupting your family time too much of the time, it might be time for a boundary. But you won't know any of these things unless you're in tune with your body and your emotions. I find that what happens instead is emotions come out sideways. So like if your boss says something to you and you've numbed it out, you're not in touch with that. In that moment, you might go home and yell at your kids or fight with your partner when you get home. If you're like the example I just used, if your mom is coming over way too much and it's irritating you, instead of speaking up to your mom, it comes out sideways, on your husband. You might be mad at your husband or snippy with your husband when really all you need to do is speak up to your mom about coming over too much. So this is how we do it. Once you're clear, number 4, by the way, this is how we do it. Once you're clear about your sense of self and you are in tune with your internal navigation system, otherwise known as your emotions, and what your body is saying to you, it's time to speak up for yourself. So remember, a boundary teaches others how we want to be treated. So how do you want to be treated instead? That's key. If we're going to set a boundary and speak up for ourselves, we need to know what we want instead. So think about that for a minute. Let's use the mom example. If your mother is showing up too much, what's bothering you about that whole thing? People just get angry and they don't even know what in the world is bothering them. You've got to break it down. And you've got to be able to really identify what is it that's making you so upset. Is it that your mom is coming over? Is it that your mom is coming over too much? Is it your mom is coming over and doing this or that, the other thing and straightening up your house? Is it your mom is coming over and fill in the blank? I don't know. You have to figure out what is it that person is doing that is offensive to you. So then you know what to set a boundary about. Okay? So if you figure out after you sit with it that, I love really seeing my mom, but I don't like her surprise visits. Let's just say that that's what you figure out. You just don't like these pop-ins that your mom is doing. This is an example of a healthy boundary you could set then with your mom. Hey, Mom, I love seeing you, but would you be willing to call in the future before you come over? Or you could say, hey, Mom, I'd love to see you, but would you mind calling in the future before you come over because I'd like to plan for your visits a little better. Period. You don't want them to be too long and drawn out. You want them to be bullet pointed. You got to have them or say them to the point with fact and truth only. When we get so wordy with our boundaries, people get lost in the weeds, I call it. Don't get lost in the weeds. Don't get lost in the weeds. We go into like apologizing, explaining, all this stuff that's weeds. You can't see through the weeds. You want to be very direct, to the point. Think of a boundary as a simple request. That's it. So I'll work with people and they'll say, well, this is what I want to have happen. And they go into these explanations, something like, so the same thing I just said about the mom. It'd be something like, hey, Mom, I love having you come over. You've been such a great mom and a great grandmother, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for all that you've done for me and the kids. And, you're so great to my kids, and your babysitting that you did for me last week was so great because now I was able to go to that wedding, and I'm so grateful for you that you were able to come over, and you know how much it means that you mean to me. You're the best. Can you maybe let me know the next time that you come over, because I really just want to make sure that I'm home and available for you. And I think Dad would really appreciate that too, because you sometimes surprise him. When you just are out driving around, you just kind of like swing in, and, Dad probably wants to know too. And, that would be great. It's like, what? What's the point here? Like I'm completely lost. I have no idea what the boundary is. I have no idea what point you're trying to make here. That's so weedy to me. Like, get the weed whacker out, clean out the weeds. What in the world are you trying to say? So what we want to do is get our truth, fact and truth, in bullet points. Pick 1 or 2 bullet points, and that's what you're going to share. That's it. That's it. And the other thing you want to do is really get in line with your adult chair, which means get crystal clear about your wants, your needs, and your desires and speak them. Speak them. And when you're really clear, you're energetically lined up with truth, people don't push back. When you're very solid, when you're not solid, people push back. When you're solid in what you're speaking and your simple request, people will go, oh, hey, oh, I didn't even know. Thank you. So here's a few more examples of healthy boundaries. So let's say this is one with a boss, okay? So, hey, Mrs. Boss, whatever your boss's name is, I love hearing from you on how I can do better at work, but I'm wondering if you could share with me your critique in private and not in a meeting with others. Period. You can even shorten that if you want. This is another one. Here's another healthy boundary. Maybe if your spouse is coming home late and you're not quite sure and you guys are trying to have dinner together and one of your spouse is coming home too late and missing dinner, you could say something like, hey, honey, I love eating dinner with you. Would you be able to call me if you're going to be late so I'm not waiting up for you? That's it. Very simple. It's matter of fact. There's no, inflection in my voice. When we end our sentences or statements with that high note, like the last one I just said, hey, honey, I love eating dinner with you. Would you be able to call me if you're not going to be late? So I'm not waiting up for you. That tone, when we rise up at the very end, can send someone else's nervous system into fight or flight, into a defense. This is why it's so important that we are matter of fact. So the end of that sentence should be, would you be able to call me if you're going to be late so I'm not waiting up for you? Period. It's not that high note. So stop with the high notes. The high notes really can send someone else in fight or flight or in that defensive mode, which is what we do not want to have happen. However, it does happen. So let's talk about that just for a minute. So what do we do when boundaries backfire? So sometimes when we do set boundaries, they backfire on us, meaning it's really not a backfire. It's just, here we are, brave enough to set that boundary, and that other person gets upset or offended and then begins to defend or even get angry. So here's the key to that. The key for you is to remain calm and centered and clear that what you are stating is you're still very firm in it. So even before, remember, you set your boundary, you got to get 100% clear, energetically clear, grounded, etc. in your truth. So if you're solid on your truth and remember that you're doing nothing wrong by speaking a boundary, then stay solid. So when that other person starts getting upset, do not get rocked. Remember right now, as I say this, it's your job to diffuse, and you can do it just like this, okay? Here are some statements for diffusion. But what you want to remember is sometimes when people are triggered, they are triggered by something, an old part of them, something from probably childhood, from a long time ago that's been coming up out of the shadow, out of the unconsciousness. So they're suddenly feeling unsafe. So what we want to do is help them to feel safe again. And your energy and how you react to their trigger is key here. It's key. So what you want to do is bring the energy down. We want to take them out of their trigger and out of their defense. So you might say something like, hey, you know what? Why don't we go ahead and just take a break here? I by no means wanted to upset you. I just wanted to share my request with you, but let's take a break. Or hold on a second. I was just stating a simple request. This is not a personal attack on you in any way. Here's another one. This is just about something that I needed, and I'd hope that you'd be able to hear me. So let's take a break. Here's one more. Hey, let's talk about this later because I'd love to hear from your perspective, but I can't hear you when you're this upset, and I want both of us to be able to share equally. So again, your job is to stay clear and calm. I've shared this on other podcasts. I'm going to share it again. I remember I had a friend one time many years ago that she raged on me. And I was so proud of myself because I knew when she was raging that she was really triggered, not even by me, it was by other stuff. I had done something that was so like mild. I had just shared with her, I just feel like I'm not ready to teach this class and I just don't have time in my schedule. And it sent her, that went down this domino effect into some rage. And I was like, wow, this is really a lot. And it was a lot of her stuff from childhood. She had a lot of neglect in her past, and who you are talking to and their reaction to you or of your boundary is not you. It's their wounding that's talking is what we want to remember. So do your best to stay centered. And if that means you have to remove yourself and walk away and say, can we take a break? I'll be back. That's fine. Now, I don't want you to think that every time that you set a boundary, this is what happens, because it certainly does not. It certainly does not. And when we set a boundary, I'd also say, hey, if it's to someone that you know well, you can say, hey, may I share something with you? This is really important to me. I'd love to be able to share it with you. Yeah, sure. Hey, the next time you go to blah, 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 I would love to come with you. Would you invite me? Yeah, sure. Hey, the next time you do this, would you be able to not show up in this way because that really hurt my feelings? Oh my gosh, I would never want to hurt your feelings. So boundaries are not indicative of confrontation and anger. They're not. And just remember, practice makes perfect. If boundaries are new to you and you're thinking about starting to set boundaries, bravo. I wish I had a round of applause I could play for you right now. But no time is like now. It's no time like the present to start setting boundaries, but practice them before you jump in. Write them down. Get your thoughts organized. Find your fact and truth. Turn that paragraph. Remember, if you want to speak your truth and you have a whole paragraph that you want to talk about, remember, practice it over and over again, but turn it into bullet points. Say one or two of those bullet points and know this is what you deserve. Boundaries are healthy, and you speaking up for yourself is a healthy act. Practice them in the mirror, walk around the house and state them before then you speak up to that person. Then your energy can stay lined up with you in your truth in your adult chair. So it really does get easier as you go along. And don't forget, you matter. You matter. It's important that you remember that you matter enough to take care of yourself. This is key. Really key. People say, oh, it just doesn't matter. Yes, it does. You matter. You matter. So here's just a few last takeaways for you. Remember these. Boundaries are not mean. Boundaries are necessary. Boundaries protect you. And this is key. Boundaries may not be enough in a toxic or abusive relationship. And the boundary you might need to set if you're in a very toxic or abusive relationship may be that you need to just remove yourself from the relationship. That also is a boundary. Because it's about what's okay with you. And if you try to set a boundary and that person gets rageful and abusive physically with you or emotionally abusive, get out. I've said this in the past. Do not stay. So based on the podcast from a few weeks ago, we did talk about the toxic relationships. If you're in an abusive relationship, your partner may not hear you and get more abusive. The best thing you can do may be to leave. And I just want to say this as a disclaimer. If I advise you that if you're questioning what to do, call a friend, call a family member, call a coach, call a therapist if you are confused, if this is you. Otherwise, others can, let me say it like this, others that are not involved can give you much better advice and clarity because they're not involved in the relationship that you're in. So listen to your friends, family, therapists, and coaches that are around you because they have clarity that you can't see. Because sometimes when we're in toxic relationships, we get so lost, we can't see what's true. So lean on people that love you and care about you that are in your life. All right, boundaries. Remember, they just teach other people how we want to be treated. So practice this. Let me know how you're doing with them. Hit me up on social media. Instagram is Michelle Chalfant. And of course, I'm all over Facebook in the Adult Chair group, Michelle Chalfant fan page. I love hearing from you guys. So share with me what you think about the show and how you are doing with your personal boundaries. Okay. Until next week, everybody. And remember, head over to theadultchair.com to get information on upcoming events, membership, this show, other shows. I'm going to put all this in the show notes. But until next week, I look forward to seeing you next week, and I'll be seated right here firmly in the adult chair. Have a great week, everybody.